All right, well, thank you all for coming today. For those of you who I haven't met yet, as she mentioned, I'm Shane Westfall, professor of psychology here at Western. When you think of psychology, what do you think of a psychologist doing? Nobody thinks anything about psychologists doing anything. All right. Well, usually people assume psychologists do things like counseling or therapy or helping people with their addiction issues. I don't do any of that. Honestly, I don't have the empathy for it. But what I am, I'm an experimental psychologist. What that means is I come up with ideas that help explain or predict human behavior, and then I try and find research methods to test out that hypothesis. On those occasions when I'm successful, then I write up the results and I publish them in scientific journals. So that's the type of psychology that I do. I conduct research in several areas, but the work I'm most well known for is looking at physical attractiveness stereotypes. So that's what we're going to focus on today. I'm going to give you a little bit of background information, and then I'll talk about why I started doing this type of research. After that, we'll go through 3 different research projects that I've worked on related to attractiveness stereotypes, tie it all up, and get you guys out of here in time to go to class, if that works for you guys. All right. So unless you've ever suffered through one of my classes, you probably don't know what attractiveness stereotypes are. In short, it's our tendency to infer that physically attractive people also have positive personality traits. Conversely, we tend to think that unattractive people have negative personality traits. This is also known as the halo effect, but really it's just the notion that when we look at other people, we often assume that if the package on the outside is pretty, there must be some good stuff inside. Conversely, if the package on the outside is not, we probably don't want to get to know them. There are a lot of examples, but just to give you a few quick ones, we tend to think that more attractive people are more competent. We tend to think that they're more intelligent. We tend to think that they're more worthy of our attention. And we also tend to think that they have more highly developed social skills. What's interesting is that we find these effects are not moderated by familiarity. What does that mean? That's a wordy way of saying that these effects don't go away even when people have known us for a long time. I mean, we pretty much all know we're being judged on our appearance when we meet someone new. When you guys go out on a job interview, what do? You dress up. Why am I wearing this instead of my basketball shorts? Same reason. We know people judge us when we first meet them. But what the research suggests is that even when people get to know the true us, those attractiveness stereotypes don't go away. That we continue to treat people differentially based on that appearance. Of course, there are a lot of social benefits that come with attractiveness. When it comes to mate selection, the more attractive you are, the easier it is to find a mate, right? We see that appearance matters when it comes to hiring-related outcomes. In short, we see that when people go on the job market, more attractive individuals are not only more likely to be hired, but they're more likely to be offered higher starting salaries. In fact, something as crucial as your freedom, your guilt or innocence, could be determined by your physical appearance. We find that the physical appearance of a defendant will often determine whether or not they're found guilty or innocent. If they're found guilty, it'll also impact how long they're sentenced for. In crimes involving a victim, we see that the appearance of the victim comes into play. In short, physically attractive victims are seen as very crucial. It's seen as a very bad thing when something happens to them. One thing I often tell my students is if you're going to kill somebody this week, make sure you kill somebody uglier than yourself. It will make a difference. They still think I'm joking. Now, these differential social benefits start at a very young age. We see that when youngsters commit transgressions, things such as throwing rocks at cars or stepping on a dog's tail, if they're a more attractive child, those transgressions are usually kind of waved off. It's just kids being kids. He'll grow out of it. He's not a bad kid. But when unattractive kids commit those same transgressions, rather, they're seen as very negative. He's just a bad kid. We're going to have trouble with him forever. In fact, we see that this differential treatment often starts at birth. Yes, I'm talking about your mother. Studies have found, for example, that when mothers have multiple children, they favor their more attractive child. Studies looking at mothers interacting with their children finds that when mothers have attractive children, they actually interact with those children more than mothers that have less attractive children. And when mothers are asked how they feel about motherhood, we find that the mothers that have the attractive children rate motherhood as being a very important part of their life. Whereas when mothers have less attractive children, they rate it as, it's just something I did. I had a few kids. So yes, the take-home message here is that these social benefits start from the day we're born. They carry with us throughout life. I've been talking about attractiveness for a couple minutes now, so I know there's at least one of you out there that's wondering, what is attractiveness? At least one of you out there is thinking, come on, Shane, beauty's in the eye of the beholder. We don't all like the same kind of people. Somebody's thinking that? Well, what the research indicates is that's not true. And really, this is not anything new. If you look at the writings of Plato in ancient Greece, he talked about objective beauty, the notion that some things and some people are more beautiful than other things. We find the same thing with human faces. Now, I stripped most of the statistics out of this presentation because I know most of you haven't taken stats yet. But when we look at inter-rater agreement, when we look at whether or not those of us in this room agree on something or disagree with each other, we often compute a correlation coefficient. That's just a wordy way of saying we have a number that tells us whether or not people agree. The lowest that coefficient can be is a 0. That indicates no inter-rater agreement, that everyone in the room disagrees on something. The highest that correlation coefficient can be is a 1. If it's a 1, that means we all agree 100% on something. And of course, humans rarely agree on things, so it's rare to get a correlation coefficient close to 1. When we rate human faces, though, of the same culture as our own, that inter-rater agreement is extremely close to 1. It's a 0.9. That's, in shorthand, saying that we agree 90% on the attractiveness of these faces. So imagine, if you will, that I got 100 pictures of faces, and I gave them to each one of you in this room, and I said, I want you to rank these faces from the hottest to the, nottest. Just put them in order, however you think they belong. So you do it, and you do it, and you do it, and you do it. We all do it. There's going to be a little bit of variation. Maybe you have a thing for redheaded midgets, or you have a thing for really tall Hispanics, or whatever you have a thing for. You're probably going to move that individual a little higher. But we're going to agree on 90% of those faces. If we're looking at children with our own culture, we see that inter-rater agreement is 0.85, meaning we agree on about 85% of these faces. And if we're looking at adults of a different ethnic origin than ourselves, that inter-rater agreement is still extremely high at that 0.88. So the point I'm trying to make here is that even though we have this notion that beauty's in the eye of the beholder, we largely agree on who's hot and who's not. And we're just fighting over that little 10% really. That 90% of us, we're going to come to a 90% agreement on attractiveness. I would describe attractiveness then as an automatic response to indicators of good health, reproductive value, inheritable fitness. In other words, I would say that there are underlying reasons why we find certain faces and certain body types and certain humans more attractive than others. Now, we don't have the time today to go into all of this, but I'll give a shameless self-plug. If you want to sign up for my evolutionary psychology course in the spring, we'll chat a lot about that. We're going to skip that today, though. What causes these stereotypes, then? Well, there are several explanations that are put forth. The most common is observational learning. And what I mean by that, we often assume, well, yeah, of course we think good things about the beautiful people, but it's in Hollywood movies, it's in music videos, it's in magazines, it's everywhere we go, we see this, so we pick up on this. Observational learning has been in psychology for quite some time. It goes back to the research of Albert Bandura. Bandura suggested that we don't actually have to learn lessons on our own. We can just watch other humans. If other humans are being rewarded for something, we're more likely to engage in that behavior. If other humans are being punished for things, we're less likely to engage in that behavior. People then, using the observational learning explanation, would suggest that, yeah, we pick up on these stereotypes because we turn on the TV, we see that beautiful people are rewarded, we see that unattractive people are punished, and we fall in line. We think that's how our culture works. There's certainly some truth to that, but it doesn't give us a complete explanation. What we find, by 6 months of age, infants prefer looking at human faces that adults have rated as more attractive. What does that mean? That means by 6 months of age, before humans have experienced all this media we're talking about, they can already categorize who's hot and who's not, and they prefer to spend their time looking at those attractive faces. By the time they're 1 year old, when infants are given the choice of several dolls with identical features except their face is altered to make them more or less attractive, the 1 year olds, they choose the more attractive dolls. They play with them. Also by 1 year of age, when 1 year old humans meet other humans that are strangers, they show more positive affect. Think of positive emotions. They have more active involvement. They're less likely to shy away from them if they're more attractive. So the key point here is that we don't have to teach children these attractiveness stereotypes. Some of it is happening intuitively. We also see that these positive attributions occur pretty much universally in cultures that not only don't have our media, but don't have any media at all. So yes, observational learning comes into play. Yes, the media reinforces these stereotypes, but we can't say that they alone create them. Where else could they come from? A second explanation suggests that these attractiveness stereotypes are just the result of self-fulfilling prophecies. So what's a self-fulfilling prophecy? It's something that by nature initially was false, but because you believed in it, you created it, you made it true. All right, so what's an example of that? Have you ever dated somebody who's extremely clingy? 2 of us? Okay. You guys may experience it in the future. Don't worry, 3 of us. All right. Well, I'll tell you how it worked out for me. I was dating somebody. I thought this was going really well. She was really clingy, a little neurotic. And so we would have these conversations where she would say to me, you know, this is great, but I know you're going to leave me one day. And you try and be reassuring, and you're like, no, babe, it's okay. We're good. And she's like, yeah, you say that, but you're going to leave me one day. So then you pick her up next week. And she's like, well, it's nice we're going out, but, you know, I know you're going to leave me. This isn't going to last. And you're like, all right. So after a few weeks, what do? You leave them. You can't handle this anymore. They go home and they're like, see, I knew he was going to leave me one day. And you're filling out a restraining order. But that's this progression of a self-fulfilling prophecy where something was false, but because of that belief, they created it. Some would suggest that that's what happens with attractiveness stereotypes. That, of course, attractive people have better social skills. Because they're attractive, more of us want to talk to them. They have more opportunity to use those social skills. Of course, attractive individuals would be more competent. Because they're attractive, we give them more chances, we give them more opportunities. So they get more chances to try and more opportunities to fail. Again, it's believed that yes, progression of self-fulfilling prophecies contributes to these attractiveness stereotypes. But again, I'm going to suggest this is not the only explanation. The third, and think of these not as competing explanations, but as complementary explanations, each one helping to explain a piece of the pie. The third suggestion would be just the forces of mate selection. Now, we do find, for example, that yes, attractive individuals have higher IQs. They have higher GPAs in school. They actually do perform better on job-related outcomes, particularly if it requires dealing with other humans. All of these effects could be due to those self-fulfilling prophecies, but it's also been suggested that due to the processes of mate selection, we should expect anything that has a genetic component and is desirable to clump together. So let me ask you this. You guys are at the age where you're dating and looking for people to mate with. How many of you want to settle down with a partner that's just stupid as a brick? Nobody? One of you? Okay, that's all right. Remember that 10% variation, you know? It's a beautiful world. So that means most of you either just don't want to raise your hand because you don't want to be here, or you don't want somebody that's stupid as a brick. Let me ask you this. When you're looking for mating partners, how many of you want somebody that's hideously ugly? It's okay, I don't judge. So nobody wants the hideous ugly partner. Well, research by David Buss at the University of Texas, as well as other researchers, have suggested that when we're looking for people to date and we're looking for mating partners, that each of us really has a mate value. Think of all your pros and cons listed on a sheet. Your intelligence, your attractiveness, your wealth, your potential, good things about you, whether you snore or not, bad things about you. And when you go on the mating market, you're going to be competing against other people's mate value. What Buss suggests then is that our desirable traits are easier to acquire if you have these other desirable traits. In short, if you're an extremely attractive person, it's easier for you to find an intelligent partner, and it's easier for you to find somebody that doesn't snore. Now, our friend Quasimodo, Life's not a Disney movie. So Quasimodo, he's probably going to have to settle for the one that's just dumb as a brick, unless you're fighting it. And then you'll probably win that one. So then what's suggested is that, yes, we should see some of this natural covariation so that these positive traits lump together. In other words, perhaps we have some of these biases, positive biases about attractive people simply because they're true. So why did I start conducting this research? When I first started in graduate school, I wanted to research evolutionary factors that affect human mating. I'm still involved in that research. I still publish in that area. But one day I was hard at work. No, I was sitting in the lab killing time on Facebook because that's what I do most of the time. And so when I was on Facebook, I saw a post by a friend of mine. This is Jeff Larson, now at the University of Tennessee. Yes, this is his actual picture. And he was interviewed for a newspaper article about the popular website Rate My Professors. Most of you are probably familiar with it, but for those of you who are not familiar with the website, it's a website where students can go on and anonymously rate their professors on how hard my classes are, on how easy I am to get along with. Until recently, about a year ago, students could also rate professors on how hot they were. If you found a professor attractive, you could give them a chili pepper. If you were really attractive, you would accumulate a lot of chili peppers. My friend Jeff, he never got any chili peppers. And so you can probably guess when he was interviewed by the newspaper, he was upset about this. He said, really, what does my appearance have to do with my teaching ability? I have a Ph.D. in psychology. I've been teaching for so many years. This is a ludicrous question. Well, I have a lot of respect for Jeff, but the researcher in me started thinking. I'm like, well, wait a minute. Maybe it does make a difference. So I reflected on my own personal experiences. After taking a break, when I went back to school, I went to South Plains Community College in Levelland, Texas. Got my associate's degree in general studies. While I was there, I took my very first psychology class ever. It was taught by Professor Vanessa Moffett, who is incredibly beautiful, and yes, this is her actual picture as well. So because of that, I literally hung on every word she said. I did. And I noticed something unusual, that whenever I would take tests, not only could I remember the information, but I could remember what she was wearing the day she gave that lecture. So this could mean a couple things. And I saw those groans. It could mean, yeah, I had kind of a pervy crush on Dr. Moffett. Probably true. But secondly, I was taking advantage of something called retrieval cues without even knowing it. Now, our current models of memory suggest that memory works a lot like a spider web. And wherever those strands intersect, those are our actual memories. And think of those strands as the paths that lead to those memories. So what frequently happens when we forget things, for example, you're taking a test and you can't remember what the answer is, you haven't lost that information, you've just lost that pathway. That strand to get you to that memory isn't there. A way to improve memory is by laying down additional retrieval cues, things associated with that memory, so it's easier for you to find the paths there. So, for example, if you meet someone and they introduce themselves, we almost always forget their names, right? Yes. What this suggests is that if you can find something to associate that with, if they have the same name as a friend, if you remember what they did, if you happen to remember what clothes they were wearing, any of those kind of things would serve as retrieval cues. Looking back then, I thought that perhaps someone's appearance could help create retrieval cues. If we found individuals physically attractive, perhaps we would lay down more pathways and that information was easier for us to access. I started looking at attractiveness research in the classroom then. And I found that there's a lot of research looking at the attractiveness of students. We see, and these are only a few examples, but we see that instructors tend to consider attractive students as more intelligent, as having more academic potential, and as having better social skills. Basically, the same attractive stereotypes I've been talking about occur within the classroom. But of course, I wanted to look at the flip side. I wanted to know if the attractiveness of the teacher would matter. Well, that hadn't been actually researched into my work. But there was some work finding that attractive teachers are considered more competent, better at motivating students, and better at stimulating learning. I thought, well, those are kind of things I would look for in a good teacher, right? If I was looking for a teacher, I would want somebody that's competent and can make me think. We also find that attractive teachers score higher on student evaluations. That's no surprise. They're really just glorified popularity contests, but we find that students do like their more attractive teachers better. My first study in this area then just tried to assess this basic question. Do students actually learn more from more attractive teachers than less attractive ones? I suggested it to my advisor in my PhD program. He literally laughed at me and said, well, even if you find results, nobody's going to care except for a couple teachers. And I'm like, okay, can I still do it, Murray? And he's like, yeah, go do your thing. They get back to work. So after conducting a small pilot study where the results looked promising, for the main study, I recruited 131 participants, a few more females than males. That usually occurs when you're recruiting out of psychology subject pools. The average age was 20, so looking at college-age students, I used some photographs of individuals, both male and female, that were considered highly attractive or low attractive exemplars. That's a wordy way of saying ugly, but it looks more polite when we put it on the PowerPoint, right? And so then I used an audio lecture of an introductory physics course. No real reason for the choice of physics. Actually, I found a lecture in physics that was closed captioned for the hearing impaired, so that way I could compel someone to make a female version without having to transcribe it. That's the only reason I used physics here. People needed a reason to believe why they were in my room. Wow, that was a horrible sentence. But I concocted a cover story where I told students, the participants in this case, that we were trying to determine if students could learn as well from online lectures as from lectures delivered in person. So that's why you're in the room. And you got selected for the condition where you're learning from the online teacher. They listened to that audio lecture from physics, and it was accompanied by a photograph, one of those that I just touched on, where they were explicitly told, this is your professor, this is who you're learning from. Afterwards, participants completed a 25-question quiz over the material, as well as a couple additional measures. So what did I find? All right, again, I'm assuming that most of you don't know anything about statistics, and that's okay. But what we did find was that the participants who had the attractive instructor scored about 6%, this is our effect size, higher on their quiz. Meaning we can explain about 6% of that variation, that is out of 100. So what that's suggesting, at least in this one particular study, about half a letter grade could be accounted for by the instructor's attractiveness. As some of you are winding the semester down, half a letter grade is kind of significant, right? Yeah. Additionally, if you can look at the p-value, this is kind of an oversimplification, but a p-value lets you know whether or not these results are likely to occur out in the general population based on this study. What we look for then in a p-value is we want it to be really low. The lower it is, the more likely these results would actually occur out in the real world. And again, that's a fairly low p-value. That's saying about 1/2 of 1% chance that these results are just spurious, that these results are false. So based on this data, most likely out in the real world, we're expecting about half a letter grade to be predicted by physical appearance of the instructor. I'll walk you through this really quickly. I looked to see whether or not the males or females did better on the physics test. There was no significant difference. The gender of the participant did not matter. I looked to see whether or not the gender of the instructor mattered. Perhaps male instructors or female instructors did better. No significant difference. Finally, I looked to see if there was an interaction between the participant's gender and the gender of the instructor. I did not find a significant interaction. What that means is that these type of results are not only driven by someone like me that has a crush on Professor Moffat. No, what these results suggest is that regardless of anyone's gender, we're intuitively paying more attention to and learning from more attractive instructors. As some of you can imagine, these results were kind of controversial when they came out. It kind of floated for a few months until there was a little interview with the Wall Street Journal, and then it kind of blew up, and I watched Ben Stein and Jimmy Kimmel do a skit making fun of me. I learned that if you're the topic of the paper, definitely stay out of the comments section. But people wanted to know why this might be occurring. I skipped ahead in my PowerPoint. We'll just roll with it. We will come back here. What I believe is occurring, and I'm conducting some follow-up studies looking at this, is that people just intuitively pay more attention to attractive individuals. Think of attention as sustained visual attention, and it's correlated with learning performance. We know that humans look longer at attractive others. We know that we pay more attention to attractive others. This occurs both intuitively and as a result of that stereotyping that I was touching on a few moments ago. So what this is suggesting is a pathway for why we might learn more from more attractive teachers. It suggested that perhaps they elicit more attention. Now, when the publicity was going on, people asked me, so are you just saying hot people should become teachers and the rest of us should give up? Absolutely not. There are a lot of factors that make a great teacher. Whether or not someone likes other people, whether or not, at least for males, sense of humor seems to play a role, whether or not someone actually cares about their students. All of these factors can play a role in how effective one is a teacher. But this data suggests that yes, appearance can matter. To go back to that slide we passed over and kind of take that message home, in that same study with physics, they evaluated the teacher that they were learning from. And what they found was that when they had the attractive teacher, they considered the teacher clearer, more organized, more knowledgeable, more persuasive, and more motivated. Why is that astounding? Because again, they were listening to the exact same lecture. The attractive versus the unattractive teacher, there was no difference in how clearly they were speaking. The only thing I manipulated was the picture. But when they had the attractive picture, that's when they had these positive attributions. Additionally, when they rated that teacher, they rated the attractive teacher as being more interesting, happier, healthier, and competent. Again, we had a lecture, we had a picture. So this suggests that people are forming this evaluation of that human and making probably a non-conscious choice how much attention to pay to them, and that attention is what's affecting learning. So once I was done with that study, I was working with a friend of mine who works in health psychology. Health psychology is pretty much exactly what it sounds like. People working in health psychology try and understand psychological factors that influence our health decision making. As I was assisting my friend on this project, I started noticing that we see a lot of stereotyping in the healthcare industry. For example, we see weight-based stereotyping. People who are highly educated in the healthcare industry still often assume that heavier individuals are less likely to follow their instructions or are doing other activities that can be considered unhealthy. We see a lot of racial stereotypes in the healthcare industry. You see this a lot when it comes to pain medication. Consistently, studies have found that when Caucasian individuals go in and they want medication for pain, they're given pain medication. When people of color go in and are seeking pain medication, healthcare professionals tend to be a little more skeptical, a little more dubious. Perhaps that individual is just here because they want to get high. We see gender stereotypes in the healthcare industry, such that males' complaints are taken much more seriously. There's a consistent stream of studies finding if males complain of chest pains, for example, that they're sent in for follow-up studies. When females complain of chest pains, what do doctors tend to assume? Perhaps it's in your mind, perhaps you're stressed out, why don't you go home and come back if it continues? So consistently we find that in the healthcare industry in America today, people that are favored by favorable stereotypes tend to receive favorable treatment in the healthcare industry. People that are stigmatized in America tend to receive negative, poor quality treatment in the healthcare industry. You guys know what I do by now, so I wanted to see if physical appearance would make a difference when it comes to the healthcare industry. The basic question then was, do more attractive individuals in the United States receive better quality healthcare services? Well, first I wanted to find out if healthcare practitioners have these same attractiveness stereotypes. I mean, it's unlikely based on what we know, but it's entirely possible that the people who go into the healthcare industry, they're just blind to our attractiveness and there wouldn't be any effects. So for a quick study then, I recruited people, all of whom employed healthcare directly to the human body, meaning I did not want psychologists. I didn't want somebody from Ventura who was going to heal your chakra or anything like that. I wanted people who were delivering medical care. These participants were recruited through the local nursing school, not here, but in Las Vegas, Nevada, Amazon MTurk, which is a medium in which you can pay people to complete surveys, and also word of mouth. We know from survey research that, yeah, people lie. So the first thing they did when they filled out this survey is they described their occupation and their training. That way we could screen out people who didn't seem to be like real healthcare practitioners. Afterwards, they viewed 24 photographs, both male and female, of attractive individuals, average-looking individuals, and our low attractive exemplars. Participants rated the pictures. You guys are going to use that term, huh? Participants then rated the pictures on 10 dimensions, positive ones, such as how honest and intelligent do you think this person is, and also some negative ones, such as how selfish do you think this person is. Well, again, we found a significant main effect. For the highly attractive individuals, they ascribed a lot more positive traits to them. Our average-looking people, yeah, kind of average. And Quasimodo down here, people didn't ascribe a lot of positive traits to him. Of course, you see the opposite pattern with the negative traits. People tended to think that our unattractive exemplars had a lot of negative traits, average for average people, and low for our high attractive individuals. So this suggests that no, that idea I had that maybe healthcare practitioners are immune to attractiveness stereotypes, we can forget about that. That led to the second study in this line. I used 172 participants. They were again recruited from the local nursing school in Nevada. It was restricted to people who were currently employed as nurses or in training to become nurses. They all read the scenario, and unless you're really bored, you don't have to read it right now. It describes an individual who was in an accident, is experiencing a lot of pain. This pain has been persistent, and this pain has been interfering with their lifestyle. This picture was accompanied by either this high attractive, average, or low attractive exemplar. And afterwards, our nurses and nurses in training filled out a couple different measures. One, they indicated what type of procedures they would recommend for this individual. And then two, they described how they felt about this individual. Well, of course, there's some reason I'm up here babbling about this. With this medical procedures form, for basic screening procedures, such as learning their dietary intake, for more invasive medical procedures, such as CAT scans or MRIs, and finally, for recommendations to psychiatric or psychological services, the nurses, as well as the nurses in training, were more likely to prescribe those procedures for the more attractive patients, conversely deciding that our less attractive patients didn't need these services. Additionally, the appearance of the individual in that scenario seems to have definitely altered the nurse's perception of them. When asked about their personal desire they would have to help this patient, we see they have more personal desire to help the attractive patients. The amount of patience they would have with the patient, again, they would have more patience with the attractive patients. Their overall positivity towards the patient was statistically different depending on how attractive they were. This one and this one being reverse coded, they suggested that they would have to be stricter with the less attractive patients because apparently being unattractive means you can't follow instructions. As far as this type of patient, making them like their job, they certainly favored the attractive patients. And our less attractive patients really seem to annoy these nurses or nurses in training. So taken together, these suggest that yes, in the healthcare industry today, there are these attractiveness biases. Perhaps it does affect the treatment that people are receiving, and it also affects their representation of these patients. This study's not without problems. External validity is the way we psychologists ask, do we think this is what happens out in the real world? And who knows? This was a survey with nurses. Perhaps once they actually find a patient, even if the patient's hideously ugly, they're going to run over here and recommend our friend for a CAT scan and actually enjoy his company. Again, the sample was restricted to nurses as well as nurses in training, perhaps doctors, perhaps phlebotomists, perhaps all the other people in the healthcare industry operate a little differently. For simplicity's sake, I only used pictures of Caucasian individuals in this study, so it would be interesting to look at the intersectionality of ethnic differences as well as attractiveness. But this definitely leads us to believe that yes, perhaps appearance is playing a role in the quality of healthcare we're receiving today. Now I'm only going to touch on one more research project because I promised I'd get you guys out of here in time. So far we've looked at how the appearance of others affects our treatment of them. But this last study I want to touch on examines how our own appearance affects how we see the world. I've conducted a lot of research looking at the just world hypothesis or just world beliefs. It's very much like what it sounds like. We find some people believe that the world operates in a very fair and just fashion, that good things happen to good people, bad things happen to bad people, and things are predictable in that fashion. We find other humans think, no, that's not really right. I mean, I know some good people who have had bad things happen to them, and life is kind of surprising. So you can think of this end as representing karma. You can think of this end as representing, no, that's just the way things happen in this world. As a psychologist, I'm really not concerned about which one of those perspectives is true. I'm concerned at looking at why someone might endorse this, or fall somewhere in between. Now, we find that endorsement of this just world hypothesis can be very beneficial for you. I mean, are any of you concerned about being accosted when you go out to your car in the parking lot today? Probably not. A couple nods. Believing that the world operates in this fair and just fashion puts us at ease. We can think to ourselves, well, I'm a good person, and if bad things only happen to bad people, I don't have to worry about anything bad happening to me. If I go to, I don't know, rowdy downtown Rock Springs, nothing's going to happen to me because I'm a good person, right? But there are some big problems with this just world hypothesis. We see it's one of the big drivers in victim-blaming behavior. If someone strongly believes in this just world hypothesis, then when something bad happens to someone, to maintain that consistent view, they have to think, well, he or she must have done something to deserve it. They brought it on themselves, right? Because why else would this happen to them? We also see that it's foundational in a lot of racial stereotypes. You know, if we know, and we do see it, that people of color have fewer opportunities than Caucasians in America, if we think the system is set up poorly, well, that's bad. We have to do something about it. But if we can say to ourselves, well, you know, perhaps these people are just lazy, that makes it easier for us to justify. Looking at just world hypotheses, again, I find that those favored by society are stronger endorsers. We find, for example, that Caucasians believe the world operates in a more fair and just fashion than ethnic minorities. We find that males are stronger endorsers of this just world hypothesis than females. So kind of the same consistent trend. I wanted to know then if our physical appearance could predict how fair and just we think the world is. So I conducted 2 studies, one just using a self-rating. Basically, you fill out a questionnaire saying how attractive you think you are, and then these participants took a survey of their endorsement of the just world hypothesis. I found a very strong connection, so I followed it up with a second study. For the second study, I not only used self-ratings, but I had participants who were willing to let me take their picture and have other people rate how hot or not they were. We did find a pretty close relationship between those two, suggesting that most of us have a pretty good idea of where we fall in that continuum. And then I compared that information with endorsement of the just world hypothesis, as well as a few additional measures. This shouldn't surprise anyone, but our more attractive individuals described their lives as being more satisfied, had much higher self-esteem, and our more attractive individuals described themselves as being healthier. For the main hypothesis then, I separated our participants into thirds, the more attractive individuals, the average individuals, and the less attractive individuals. And what you're looking at here is endorsement of that just world hypothesis. We find that more attractive individuals are much more likely to believe that the world operates in a fair and just fashion, because really, it has for them. We find that for more attractive individuals, if they work hard, they achieve things, and they think this must be how it works for everyone else. But for our less attractive individuals, that's often not the case. So these 2 studies are suggesting that not only are we judging other people differently based on their appearance, but we're describing the whole world, we're interpreting the whole world differently based upon our own experience. So why am I talking about this? Mostly because they asked me to, but beyond that, imagine that you meet somebody new. What do you notice about that individual? Assuming you've never seen these individuals together before, think what you notice about them. Human beings are natural categorizers. When we see things, we categorize it as food versus non-food. We categorize it as living versus non-living. We categorize it as art versus furniture. Now, you can't do that one most of the time, but we try and categorize things. And when we look at other humans, we intuitively notice the categories that we're going to put them into. Now, I'm not suggesting we do this consciously. Research suggests this is very much a non-conscious process. But when we meet new individuals, we categorize their race, their gender, their approximate age, their physical attractiveness. There's a lot of work out there looking at these top 3 stereotypes, but attractiveness stereotypes are not something that we really talk about. We may kind of know, yeah, attractive people usually have it better than Quasimodo, but it's not something we talk about. Kind of the take home of this whole talk then is through my research, I just want people to be aware that not only is the world operating in a different fashion based on our appearance, but it affects things such as our successes, such as our failures, and we need to keep that in mind when we're interacting with others. And so with that, I've got time for a few questions. Thank you. Yeah. Oh. Go ahead if you want. All right. Go for it, Ryan.
So when we're talking about the 6-month-old babies and identifying the face more attractive, do we see that they'll reject their mother if it's unattractive?
No, not to that extent.
So it's not strong enough to repel that direct connection?
Yeah, correct. Yeah, I mean, if you go back in psychology to the wire monkey versus the cloth monkey, even if the mother is just hideous, that's still the source of comfort for the child, as well as food. So, no, that's not going to occur. But that would suggest that perhaps the child would be more attached to a more attractive mother. Well, fun question. Yeah.
This experience of attractiveness versus positive attributes kind of true vice versa. We see a teacher that's, say, kinder or more understanding or funnier, therefore we think is more attractive. Even if someone who first perceived it.
Yes. So the question was, does this relationship operate in both directions? Not only positive attributes for more attractive people, but if we see someone such as a teacher who's very kind or warm or something like that, would we then view them as a little more attractive? And the answer is yes. If we go back to research looking at our partners, we often see our partners as more attractive than other people would because we build up that relationship with them, and so there is more positivity towards someone in that case. So yes, you can think of some benefit there. Although I would certainly say, based on the research of my work as well as others, if you had everything being perfectly equal and you had an attractive versus an unattractive teacher and both were really kind and both were really warm, that there would still be more positivity towards the more attractive one. Great question, though. Is that a question or a pen?
Yes.
Okay, go for it.
So you had mentioned the audio with the physics one. Did you use a male and female voice?
Mm-hmm.
So in that, is it possible that audio tone inflections were actually part of the reason for those findings?
That wouldn't explain the difference. Again, I did look at the difference between the male and female teacher versions, and there was no significant difference there. And so, no, in that study, that wouldn't be the case. Now, I mean, it is possible that both perhaps had positive or negative inflections, and that could skew the results one way or the other, but that still doesn't explain the between group difference. No, great question. Any other questions? All right, let's call it a day.